Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission's webinar focused on providing an overview of our Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant Program and walkthrough or preview of our online application. My name is John Balai, and I'm the manager of our Planning and Operations Program, which is responsible for managing this relatively new grant program in its fifth year. I'm joined here today by Hillary Hollier, Pierre McCoy, who are key members of our grant team, as well as several members of our executive management team and commission staff. So to kind of get us started here, we wanted to kind of run down some of the webinar logistics for today. Please note this webinar is being recorded, and the primary purpose for that is just so we can post it on our website for folks to view who were not able to attend today's session with us. We ask that you mute all lines, although I think we've effectively done that on our end. So, but that's just to minimize distractions while we cover the material. We'll have time at the end for question and answers. We're anticipating the content to run about 40 minutes, maybe a half hour. So we should have plenty of time afterwards to address questions as they may come up after the presentations. We ask just for our management of questions, use the chat function to pose those. That way we have someone in the room here, Pierre McCoy, who will kind of queue those up and allow us to answer them in a good order so that we can get through as many of them as we can with the time we have available. If there are any questions we kind of run out of time and are unable to address, or if folks would like to send a question that they're maybe not comfortable posing here or as a follow-up, we have listed here an email account we've set up exclusively for the grant program, as well as a dedicated phone extension. And these are available on our website as well. You can certainly ask a question anytime via either of those two means. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn things over to Drew Dayhoff, our executive director. He's going to give a brief welcome and some opening remarks before we get into things.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and for your interest in our Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant offering. We're excited to kick off our fifth year of this grant. If I'm being honest, we didn't know quite what to expect 4 years ago, but I'm happy to say we've been very pleased with the projects that came to us as we've continued to be over the subsequent years. I think it's also safe to say that we learned a lot over those years. We learned about innovative projects, learned about opportunities, and learned about needs. And of course, we have observed growing interest from all of you as the number of applications rises every year. And that's been accompanied by higher and higher quality submissions. We're really getting some amazing proposals and grateful for them. That also presents a challenge to our review team, who continue to do a remarkable job at rating and ranking the various projects across the varied categories. So as we embark today on year 5, we're taking what we've learned and observed, and we've fine-tuned the offering a little bit this year, as you'll hear. But our underlying principles remain the same. We're looking for beneficial and innovative projects. Hope you find this webinar useful in that regard. It's intended to provide information to potential applicants about what is going to be of most interest to us this year, so you can devote your valuable time and resources to putting together a successful application. So thanks again for your interest. To those of you who have received an award in previous rounds, thank you for your role in making this program a success. To those of you new to the effort, we look forward to seeing your ideas. John.
Great. Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. All right. So just to get started, we'll kick things off with a review of the purpose of the program. And that is to attract and fund projects that help mitigate consumptive use or otherwise improve drought resilience in the Susquehanna drainage. In terms of mitigating consumptive use, we're talking about things like reducing, offsetting, masking consumptive use to reduce its impacts, particularly during low flow and drought periods, and that's directly related to increasing drought resilience. So that's really the primary focus of the grant program. It's been a long-standing focus of our agency as we've opportunistically sought out developing consumptive use mitigation projects before initiation of the grant program, whether it be water supply storage at Corps of Engineers federal reservoirs or other projects to mitigate consumptive use. But the grant really opens the door to external ideas, resources, and has allowed us to really accelerate implementation of projects on the ground by leveraging all of your ideas and partnerships. So Drew kind of teed this up nicely in the beginning. We wanted to right out of the gates kind of highlight a few things that are new in this fifth round of the grant program. So starting at the top, we're limiting applications to one per organization. So that basically means we aren't looking to accept multiple applications from the same organization. If you received an award in previous years, you're certainly still eligible to submit an application and get another award in subsequent years. We're just limiting applications to one per organization. In the benefits section of the application, where we're really interested in teasing out the benefits of a proposed project, there's a requirement to submit a primary water quantity benefit. There's the opportunity to submit additional secondary benefits, broader in scope, but we really want to see at least one water quantity-based benefit from the project submitted in the application. And then third, the groundwater replenishment alternatives project category, or BIN, is a new one that we've incorporated into our grant program guidelines and applications to replace the environmental and water quality alternatives category. The project types listed as examples under the groundwater replenishment alternatives are some of the same ones that were featured under the environmental and water quality alternatives, but really this new project category allows us to try to focus some of our intent in receiving applications on projects that try to advance some of our groundwater management plan objectives. So nothing's changed here, but just to run through eligible applicants under the grant program. Project sponsors, and that means any entity that owns or that holds a docket approval permit from the Susquehanna River Basin Commission would be eligible. Government entities are certainly eligible. Nonprofits are eligible, and so are academicians. If you're a consultant, there's certainly plenty of opportunities for consultants to partner with any of these eligible applicants and submit an application on their behalf or in partnership with them. In terms of eligible project types, these are kind of the four principal categories or bins, as we refer to them, that host project types within them. I'll go over these at a high level, and then we'll share an example of each of these as we move forward. Water supply alternatives are basically focused on water storage assets, or it could be impoundments, reservoirs, quarries, flooded quarries, abandoned or underground mine pools, surface mine pools. And we also have in this emergency interconnections with other systems, perhaps ones that rely on storage during drought conditions. The second category, project operation alternatives, they're ones that could change operations year-round or perhaps only during low flows or drought times. Some types that are covered under these include conservation releases from reservoirs, either new ones or modified ones, aquifer storage and recovery projects, building some redundancy by conjunctive use management in coordinating the use of both surface water and groundwater sources to perhaps provide a little more resiliency during drought periods, and then even drought response actions, drought action plans that result in changed drought operations to increase resilience. The third bin, we term demand modification alternatives. They're really what most folks would call water conservation projects. They can be reuse, they can be water recycling, water conservation, and we'll highlight an example of these. The new one, the fourth bin, groundwater replenishment alternatives, is really focused on Projects that promote, increase, or protect groundwater recharge, including the preservation of land that contains critical aquifer recharge areas or high groundwater recharge potential areas. Even stormwater management projects or best management practices, particularly ones that have an infiltration component that would help on the help restore groundwater recharge functions in many of our basin watersheds. So to highlight a few examples in each of these categories, so we'll start out in the water supply bin, and we'll feature Bill Meyer Quarry, which is a project about a half hour south of our office here in Harrisburg in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. It's an inactive flooded limestone quarry, and through years of study and in partnership with Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority, who actually owns a waste to energy facility a few miles from this water supply storage asset, we were able to enter into an agreement for over 400 million gallons of water supply storage that we can use for low flow management. It was a great example of a partnership with, in this case, a regulated project. And interestingly enough, this year we actually operated the project in a testing mode, and we're able to implement some infrastructure at the site that we had not in previous years, and run a pump test for 10 days to assess how operations were performing. In the second category, project operations alternatives, and this specific, well, this example is more of a generic one. We're talking about, in concept, a public or private reservoir in which operations are revised to implement either a low flow augmentation release during low flow periods or droughts, or a continuous conservation release that meets the commission standards, so that a natural flow regime is restored downstream continuously. We have funded some projects in this category, and particularly they've been associated with public water supply reservoirs, where, maybe through a water allocation permit from Pennsylvania DEP, a conservation release requirement had changed. And so we've been able to fund projects to make the necessary outlet works infrastructure improvements to actually implement those modified conservation releases. And so that's kind of been a mechanism for us to fund projects in this category. In the demand modification category, again, the water conservation based one, the highlighted project we have here actually was a pilot we did before we launched the grant program 5 years ago. Again, in partnership with Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority at their Susquehanna Resource Recovery Center, just south of us here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's a waste energy facility. We worked with an MIT startup called Infinite Cooling. We're able to implement a wire mesh system over their cooling towers that's hit with an electrostatic charge that increases the efficacy of capture of water that would otherwise be lost through the evaporative cooling process, and eliminate plumes at the project, result in water savings, high quality water returned for use back into the system. And so that's an example of a project. We also, in this category, have funded a number of water conservation, demand reduction, advanced metering infrastructure, pressure management type grant projects in the water supply sector to help address unaccounted for water loss and reduce system water losses. And the last category, again, the new one, groundwater replenishment alternatives. The example that we're featuring here is one that we actually was the second of our 2 pilots we implemented prior to our grant program 5 years ago, in partnership with Upper Susquehanna Coalition in Steuben County, New York, where they were able to acquire a 100-acre property and on it do 30-some acres of wetland and riparian buffer restoration. This particular tract is immediately adjacent to state-owned lands, and so ultimately the vision is that it will be kind of linked or connected and become perpetually preserved as state land. it's a good example of, agency conservation group partnership, and obviously that 100 acres, and in particular, the portions of that 100 acres that contain high recharge potential areas would protect that groundwater recharge function for years to come. So kind of high level summary in terms of funding, and this is all the same as it was in prior years. Total amount we'll be allocating is $4 to $6 million. I'll say over the 5 years we've implemented the program, we've hung around that $6 million range, that ceiling, more than we have the lower range, and in some cases we've gone slightly above it. We've continued to advertise the desire to fund projects at the tune of 100,000 or more, signifying our intent to kind of focus on higher profile, maybe more impactful projects. I will say that we have, and if you look on our website where we feature a summary of the projects we funded under the program to date, we have funded several in the tens of $1,000 range. Last year, we switched from what had been previously a 2-tiered cash match requirement to a single 20% cash match requirement, and the simplification there we found favorable and plan to continue to move with that cash match requirement in this year's announcement. And then again, typically the grant agreements that we execute with grantees cite a period of performance for 3 years, but we have, recognizing some of the complexities and things that come up in the course of a project, we have done no cost extensions in limited instances. I'll say one thing we've highlighted that we believe grantees have found attractive is the grant program. The funding is non-federal, non-state, so that really opens the door to some opportunities for folks to bring other federal or state awarded grant funding to the table here with our grants and offer them as cash match. In terms of application reviews, we basically collect all the applications that were submitted via our online system, and Pierre will give a kind of walk through that in a moment. And the first step is they go through kind of an administrative review. We check to make sure that they meet the eligibility requirements. So they were submitted by an eligible applicant. The proposed project represents an eligible project type. And to a large degree, the most important piece is that the cash match requirement has been met. Grant applications received that are deemed administratively complete then go on to full technical review by a committee of 8 staff we've built here. They represent various technical programs and expertise, both in terms of discipline and years of experience. So we get a good product in the review through that team of 8 there, and basically the applications are reviewed in our Amplifund grant management system and scored based on criteria we outline in our grant program guidelines. It's really an important section of the grant program guidelines to look at. It's near the end. It's called evaluation criteria, and we spell out basically the score sheet that we use to grade applications, as well as the point allocations associated with each of those categories we score. Highlighted here is purpose and benefits, and I just wanted to highlight again, that's really a fundamental section of the application in terms of scoring. It's in this year's round, it's a quarter or 25% of the overall point allocations, but certainly applicants should look at that evaluation criteria section of the guidelines, and to have a competitive score with your application, be able to hit on and do well in describing or addressing each of those application sections according to that point matrix in our guidelines. So I'm going to go through the schedule here, which has been the schedule we've held in the previous 4 years of the program. And then I'll turn things over to Pierre to give kind of a walkthrough of our online application. We opened this funding opportunity on November 3, and the application period closes the end of January 30. During that period, again, we tend to address a lot of questions from applicants, either by phone or email, and those dedicated email addresses and phone extensions we provided earlier. During the grant application review period, we cite February to March. It doesn't take us typically that long, but last year we received 68 applications. So it depends on the volume that we receive. We typically aim to award grants in the April timeframe. That gives us the opportunity to preview what we've received with our commissioners at our March quarterly meeting. So that's convenient for us to then announce afterwards in April. And then ultimately after that, we deal with a few administrative items, and then we exchange grant agreements, at least in draft form, with grantees in the hopes of getting agreements executed July 1 of 2026, which is the start of our fiscal year. I'll also call out for folks interested in what those grant agreements look like and that have not received a grant to date. There is a link to grant agreement template on our website that grantees have found to be really helpful. So we'd encourage you to check that out. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Pierre to cover a high-level overview or summary of our online application.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so this year we have a couple changes in our technical application and eventually also in the actual program itself. Amplifund was rebranded to Una Grants, powered by Amplifund. The change is cosmetic from a green to, I'm gonna get this wrong, teal? No. Indigo. This is why Hillary helps us out. Indigo, aside from that, the functionality will be the same. I can't bar any changes down the road if there's gonna be some efficiencies. We'll just have to, hold on. I'd recommend that you look at their FAQ and their, news section of their website. It'll explain exactly what went down. So we will also be updating our documents so that we go from the green to the indigo. But aside from that, the directions are still applicable and there's really no change, just cosmetic. So don't be worried. I will go through next. Oh, because you're not on it. We'll go through this is what it looks like. Here's the change. The name obviously changes. But the layout's exactly the same. We also have a few new grant resources for the grant applicants, as you'll see here on the left-hand side. Of note is we have a groundwater potential map. We have a new updated grant guidelines for this year. They've also been uploaded. Aside from that, our landowner consent letter is up there, our fiscal year spreadsheet's up there, IRS forms, etc. Everything you need to apply and eventually receive a grant. Hillary's done a lot of work. Thank you very much for setting that up. Here on the right-hand side, you'll see, just like last year, we'll have our Consumptive Use Mitigation grant. You'll have to create a login, and you'll eventually apply. And then once you apply, everything will be done through Amplifund. We do have a paper copy if you want to look at it, preview the actual application ahead of time on PDF, but everything is submitted digitally. Next. Okay, so this is still the old Amplifund green, so don't mind that. I do want to say there's a couple things that you need to be aware for the first time applicants. For you who have applied before, you're probably aware of this. We use the internal budget with Una grants. Sorry, I'm going to say Amplifund by accident a couple times. And this is really important because it lines up with your tasks. So you'll see here the tasks you'll put in, the personnel, the construction, you'll put your narrative, what it means. Most importantly is non-grant funded means that is a match. So if you put no non-grant funded, you won't be able to put a match. That's the only thing you want to put down. You guys usually call in and say, hey, I can't set up my match when I put my application. That's most likely the culprit right there. Just a little tip right there. In the cash match section down below, notice that there's dollar and percentage. You would think that the way that looks, it would be percentage because it's highlighted, but you'd be wrong. It's actually dollar. So just keep aware that the outline sometimes doesn't match what you think, and you might have to click some of the extra buttons. And then lastly, I will say this is a double book accounting style. In other words, on the left here, you'll see the grant funding, which will be your award requested, and your non-grant funding, which will be your cash match. Must line up with all your expenses budget in grant funded and non-grant funded. If it does not, you will not be able to submit. So that's something that gives some people some trouble. And yes, it is down to the penny. It will block you. So that's just kind of an overview. Aside from that, everything is kind of the same. We have FAQs on the website to help. So there's unit grants, and hopefully it'll be a lot smoother this year. Next. And then I just want to show what it looks like and get a feel for that budgeting style. You'll notice that they're grant funded. Non-grant funded essentially is a code word for match. That's where your 20% goes in. I will give you a hint that if you do get awarded your grant, it is better to have less tasks that are more in line with subtasks than having more tasks. You'll figure that out when you start getting the projects, when sometimes some funds have to be moved around. So keep it simple and keep tasks as limited as possible. There again, you have the grant funded, you awarded 150,000, you're matching at 30,000, total is 180. Down below again, it must match so that the revenue and costs line up to a 0. Again, it will not let you apply if you don't have it down to the penny. So if that's usually where people get a lot of hang up. I will also say that these tasks here should probably line up with your scope of work and your budget, your scope of work in the previous application. That helps us out a lot. So you might want to flip back and forth that way. And I think that's all I have for the budget this year. As always, you can reach out. Next. Oh, I forgot. Yes, there's also the multi-year budget. This is to help us budget on a multi-year section. Amplifund doesn't really have that native. Sorry, unit grants doesn't have it native. This is pretty straightforward. You just split off what you think you're going to expend. That helps us kind of budget our budget for the year. Please note that this is our fiscal year. This is not a calendar year budget. So that's July 1st to June 30th. And then it's pretty straightforward. It's a spreadsheet. You download it and then upload it. So that's it for the budget section. As always, we're here and available to answer your questions either through our email or our phone line, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So, John?
Thanks, Pierre. I'm seeing that puts us just before 10:30, so we have plenty of time to cover questions and answers. Please submit your questions via the chat. I saw something in there that suggested we might be having some issues, but I talked to our folks here and we tested it, and it appears we're able to receive questions via the chat function. So we'd encourage you to submit any you have there. We're likely to go to mute here for a couple of minutes to see what comes in and kind of get our house in order to start queuing those up to address them. And we'll read the question and provide the response in order we get them, or in an order that's convenient for us to answer. So right now we're going to go to mute for a few moments, and then we'll be back on to address questions and answers. Thank you. Okay, everyone, just clarification. When you submit your questions via the chat, please direct them to the host or myself, John Bali, just so that we make sure we're getting them versus send them general to the whole group. So direct your chat questions to the host, please. All right, folks, thanks for submitting questions. We are getting them through the chat, and we're queuing them up to kind of respond to. We'll begin doing that. The first one is there a max grant request? What is a typical grant award? Can any costs be incurred before the grant is executed? We have not put a max grant amount or a ceiling for individual projects. We cited we're interested in projects over 100,000 or more. We cite the $4 to $6 million range. You can look at our website, and this is probably the best line of evidence to help get your bearings on this, and you could see the range of costs that have been awarded to projects in the past 4 or 5 years. I will say we have seen applications for projects that have proposed receipt of funding that's a significant portion of the express $4 to $6 million, and not that they couldn't be funded, but they would have to be high scoring projects, and we have funded projects in that track record at the tune of $500,000, but most of the projects have been generally in the hundreds of thousands range. Again, there's not a max, but I think the best piece of information to help inform where we've been with previous awards is to look through the on our website. We list the grantees, describe the project, and we cite the amount that was funded. So that answers what a typical grant award is. I'd say, hundreds of thousands. Can any cost be incurred before the grant is executed? No, again, we look to execute grants beginning to be effective July 1, and July 1 really is the date where we look to have costs incurred that are reimbursed through the grant. So the program has not reimbursed for project costs prior to us having an executed grant agreement with a July 1 start date. Want to take two, Pierre? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll take two, being the geologist here. For stormwater projects, if they are located in areas with karst geology where infiltration generally isn't recommended, okay, due to the possibility to create sinkholes, will these projects be deemed ineligible or ranked lowly because the stormwater isn't being infiltrated through BMP? So I think we're starting with the wrong premise here. Actually, karst areas are probably some of the best areas to infiltrate stormwater. It just has to be karst appropriate infiltration facilities. Sinkholes and closed depressions are natural infiltration, very high volume. The trick is to make sure that the water that you are infiltrating has met water quality objectives. So filtering it or taking it off of green lawns is much better. It will not be. In fact, trying to make areas with sinkholes completely impervious leads to more sinkholes. So I highly recommend you do not negate infiltrating, and it's better to have sinkholes in stormwater facilities and under buildings or roads or other infrastructure. So I think that probably answers that question right there.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Pierre. I can take the next one, and I have it on my screen so you can continue to queue others. Can funding include watershed planning efforts that identify key locations and care restoration in a critical watershed? Or is it explicitly for implementation projects? Planning is eligible for funding under the program. We've tended to have preference for projects that are geared towards implementation or directly will lead to or involve implementation. But if you look under in the grant program guidelines under eligible expenses, planning related efforts are covered. To strengthen an application in this vein, I think to be competitive scoring would try to make the case that this planning effort could really lead to real on the ground project implementation and be more ultimately in the subsequent phase or than just a planning effort in and of itself. Is there a second part?
Was there?
Specifically planning efforts that would include, this is the same question, data collection from infiltration testing, water quality sampling of surface and existing groundwater wells, etc. I think the same thing. The planning, planning efforts are covered as eligible expenses under the grant, but really to be competitive scoring and sizing up against potentially 60, 70 other applications, you'd want to try to make some link to the project having the possibility or likelihood of moving to implementation and actually ultimately resulting in on the ground implementation. How does this grant handle unforeseen costs during a construction project? Can those costs still be grant funded, or are funds only limited to the tasks in the project description? Everybody involved in construction projects knows unforeseen costs come up. They certainly can be handled in the application by building in some buffer or some room to capture those things at some level, but recognizing you need to submit a competitive application, the cost benefit related, you're going to want to probably produce an application with a reasonably tight cost and not inflate things too much. can those costs still be grant funded, or we have in very limited instances, we have awarded additional grant funding to project components that have come up during the course of a project. We have some criteria we use here internally to vet those and determine whether or not we feel like it's reasonable to do that. So we do have a mechanism to do that, but again, those have been in more limited case by case determinations based on internal vetting against some criteria we've set up. Is there opportunity to meet with SRBC staff regarding a past proposal that was not awarded? We receive this question quite often. You know, to date, we have not offered like back briefs or on applications that haven't been submitted. Like I said, last year we received 68 applications. We awarded 18 projects, and just by function of having to do post briefings on 50 applications that weren't successful, we don't have the staff resources on the effort to really make that a viable option. And so to date, we have not done that. I would encourage folks, you know, we have had applicants make a submission in 1 year, not get awarded, effectively come back and make a submission in a subsequent year and be awarded. And in some cases, they've significantly improved their application and been awarded. And in other cases, their application didn't change significantly, but they were more competitive relative to the pool of applicants in that year. And so they were able to basically get a redo and then get awarded. So we have seen that, and we do. You certainly are welcome to ask questions, and our staff team really tries to do a sincere job at providing responses to questions received during the open application period. That really could be, I think you could get at what you're interested in getting at by rephrasing the question, having it in the upfront part of the application period, and we're interested in getting good projects funded, so we're not trying to stonewall anyone. I think we'd be willing to try to help provide some insight to help out there. Can a current grantee submit a new application? Yeah, absolutely. The only thing we changed this year is that we're going to restrict awards to one per, or we're going to restrict the applications to one per organization. But you could have a grant award in several of the previous 4-year cycles and still submit an application this year. And we actually have seen projects do that effectively as part of a kind of almost a phased approach to implementing a bigger project by taking on like bite-sized pieces of it in subsequent years as part of a bigger package. And they've even alluded to that in some ways in their application to kind of forecast that to us. Okay, last year, unsuccessful applicants were told the commission wasn't offering any feedback on applications. But in the future, there may be guidance for different project types based on past successful applications. If we have a project that was unsuccessful in the past, is there a reference available for similar projects that were successful? For this, you know, again, similar to the previous answer, we haven't to date conducted after application briefings for unsuccessful applications that weren't awarded funding. And I cited the mere volume of those that we might be undertaking if we were to do so. So we're continuing to be in that position and approach. In terms of the latter half of the question, and guidance for different project types based on successful applications, I really would encourage folks to look at, and now in 4 years of projects, we have a pretty good catalog, and it's easy to scan through. You can see the grantee name, the amount of grant funding allocated, and a brief description of the project type, including a citation of the project benefits anticipated from the project. So you can really get a feel for what we've funded in the past, and I think you could size up your project relative to that and get a sense of the likelihood of success in terms of what you're proposing. The other thing I would offer and we've said this again, is to really vet your project through the evaluation criteria we have near the tail end of our grant program guidelines, because really we look at each application that makes it through the administrative review process against that. We've effectively built a score sheet in Amplifon or UNA that we score, our team of 8 scores against those criteria. So if you're hitting each of those and you're producing application content that's strong in those categories, you'll get the points. So that's all I'd offer. Are you eligible? Are you reasonably aligned with past awards, and have you been able to really effectively address the evaluation criteria and the guidelines that we're using to score projects? Do funds previously provided by other grants count as match, or do they have to be to the next phase? For example, if you have a Growing Greener grant for design and permit, but you need construction funding, does a Growing Greener portion count as match?
I'm taking the question as maybe timing, like they've done the design with the previous grant and now they look to construct. Maybe that's at which point you're gonna run into an issue.
The most important part about matching funds is the matching funds must be expended during the period of performance for the SRBC grant. So according to John's timeline, you'll see that most grants, we do the awards, the grant period of performance starts in July. You have 3 years for the period of performance. So the match needs to be expended during that same period of performance, 3 years. And it needs to be related to the project that you've requested the funds for. So essentially, if you're doing design permit, pardon me, and you're using SRBC funds for implementation, the design permit activities that would fall within those 3-year period, a grant period of performance for the SRBC grant, they would be eligible. And then you could have implementation funds from us, during that same period of performance. But the key is matching funds need to be expended during the 3-year period of performance for the SRBC grant.
Another question we had is, can you provide any resources on how to calculate water quantity benefits for preservation of critical aquifer recharge area lands? I'd say industry standard, there's a lot of different ways you can skin that chicken. However, I recommend either USGS or DCNRs. They have a very broad map. They give you a scale in order of inches you can use. That'll be a good baseline to use, but a lot of recharge is specific to the site, which there are many ways to do it. But if you want something broad and overview, I'd recommend the USGS and DCNR publications that are pretty well vetted.
Great, thanks, Peter. I'll take a real softball question, and that's not with any disrespect. I'm just happy to take this one. Will the presentation packet be available after the presentation? Well, actually, that's an interesting question, more than I thought on first read. We will be posting a recording of this session on our website, but we could just as easily post the slides. I think that's what that particular question is getting at. We'd be happy to do that. Yeah, we can do both. Does SRBC do partial grant requests, or is it typically an all or nothing proposition? We have done in very limited instances, and I can only think of one over 4 years, where we had a grant applicant come in and at a dollar figure, and we basically said we were interested in funding the project, but at half of the requested funding, we had them retool the scope and budget, and we're able to move with. But typically we've just we haven't done partial awards. So I would say we're looking to try to get an application and get to an executed agreement and get it up and running. We haven't typically carved out elements of projects and shopped for components of projects. We've taken a project as proposed in the application and given it a yay or nay and moved forward. We haven't necessarily broken them into pieces. So that's been our track record. Okay.
You're happy to ask.
Okay, yeah. I'm getting a few, Pierre, questions that are coming to me that I can address, and I don't know if they may be coming to me as the co-host or me as John or me as the one who keeps talking too much, but someone asked, is there a limited percentage of the requested funding that can go towards planning efforts? We have not cited a threshold like that. Again, we want, I think planning is an eligible funding, and it's an eligible use of funding per our grant guidelines. We have funded projects that are planning focused, but the reason they scored higher is there was a really high likelihood, or it seemed clear from the applicant submission that there was a good likelihood of the project leading to implementation or a change. So we don't have a kind of hard line that says, you know, no more than 25% of an award can go to planning. We don't have anything like that, but we will be. Our committee will likely score projects that really make a case that this could lead to some implementation and ultimately an increase in drought resilience. Here's another question from Hannah. The application indicates that a landowner consent letter is required. If so, is that required at the time of application or if when awarded? It's required with the application. Would copies of recorded easements specific to allowing construction of the floodplain restoration satisfy the landowner consent requirement? We have had folks submit.
Yeah, an easement is a deeded title as long as it provides access and the scope with which is proposed in the application, it would count as landowner consent.
Yeah, that was our counsel, Jason Euler, clarifying that, yeah, recorded easements would count as meeting the requirement of our landowner consent letter. We've seen folks submit DEP's Growing Greener landowner consent letter template in this place. We effectively want to make sure that the project being proposed has landowner consent to actually move to implementation rather than. So that's what we're looking for. We'll be reasonable in our assessment of that requirement. I have another one. This is from, Patrick, I got your question here. Would creation of a pond or reservoir and replacement of a golf course irrigation system with reduction of municipal water use be an acceptable type of project? And I would say yes. We have, in particular, we have done projects with the golf course industry for irrigation system upgrades, and particularly if in your application you can make the case for a water savings realized from that infrastructure upgrade. We've done that. We also have some projects where I can't say a creation of a new pond or reservoir, but certainly enhancement of existing water storage features on golf courses as a means to supply irrigation particularly during times of drought. We have funded those. So I'd encourage you, Patrick, to look at the project descriptions we funded in the past, and you could comb those there and find the ones that are golf course specific, and you'll see the types of things and the types of project components we've been able to fund through the grant program. But I think the ones you're mentioning here would be acceptable. Local share and PA small water sewer projects limit grant funded engineering costs to 10% of the grant amount. Is there a similar restriction with the consumptive use mitigation grants? We don't have a restriction in that vein, or we don't have anything similar to that in our program. You know, again, we cite that we have a preference for projects that actually result in on the ground implementation. So projects that convince our review committee to have a more likelihood of getting there versus ones that are strictly planning or strictly engineering focused, will score far better. But we don't have a planning percentage or engineering design percentage threshold for this grant program. So great questions. Thank you. Certainly keep them coming. We have we have 7 minutes before the top of the hour, and we can go longer if folks desire as well. What we're going to do here for a moment is take another pause and go to mute and just see if we can find any other questions coming in through the chat to queue up, and we'll be back on in a moment to address those. So feel free to keep your questions coming.
All right, we got a couple more questions in here at the last minute. I'll take the first one. Are stream restoration projects eligible? Yes, they are, provided they go through the guidelines and provide water quantity benefits. That would be restorations in floodplains that increase recharge. So just follow the guidelines as they're written, and if stream restoration projects fulfill those, they will be scored highly. So that's the answer to that one. John, there's a couple more, I think.
Yeah, can projects located outside of Pennsylvania in the New York area of the Susquehanna River Basin be eligible for funding? Any projects proposed in the Susquehanna River Basin are eligible for funding, whether they're in New York, Pennsylvania, or Maryland. And there's probably limited instances where you could make the case if a project's on the periphery of our basin, not necessarily physically in the footprint, but benefits our basin from a drought resilience, consumptive use mitigation, low flow management, that could be eligible as well. But certainly anything in our watershed, our basin, the Susquehanna, regardless of state boundary, is eligible for funding, as long as it meets the other eligibility requirements. Question here, you mentioned funding enhancement of existing water supply infrastructure, in parentheses, on golf courses. Is constructing new storage areas not eligible? Constructing new storage is eligible. It would be a water supply alternative. And so, part of our consumptive use mitigation program focuses on utilization of storage during low flow periods and droughts as a way to mass direct impacts to, say, surface water sources or groundwater sources. So that, it would be eligible. That said, it's been a while since I've been privy to all the nuances associated with permitting the construction of new storage assets. I would expect they could be more complicated for on-stream storage versus off-stream storage and those sorts of things. We don't necessarily get into, and those would come through other state permitting entities. So I think have gotten through all of the questions we've received in the chat. Right now, I'm showing 10:58. We will give it another minute. Please, if anyone has anything else you'd like to pose as a question, we're happy to address it. Just dump it in the chat. We'll hang on here for another minute and see if we get anything else. Otherwise, we can wrap things up and give you back the rest of your Thursday. Okay, it looks like we have another one here. We're going to address this and take another look, and then we can wrap up. Is there a GIS layer available for the priority watersheds and recharge potential maps so we can zoom in to our local areas? Those are on the Susquehanna Atlas, right? And they're linked on our.
Yeah, they're both on the Susquehanna Atlas. You can also download them directly. I believe POSDA also has a version of it, or we have a link directly on a sea mitigation grant website that also gets you straight there. We have 3 different ways to access it.
Hannah, if you need any help after following up with that guy, if you check those resources out, if you need any help, just give us a call or shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help you get what you need to do that. And if we don't think it's up as a link on our grant webpage, we can make modifications and make sure the information's up there and available. So with that, I'm showing 11 o'clock. I'm proposing we kind of wrap things up. We appreciate everyone's attendance today and some very thoughtful questions. Again, we'd encourage you to follow up with us. Again, hit hit our website. The grant webpage contains a lot of useful information. This email account's monitored daily. We try to be responsive to emails within a day or two. And you can also hit us at the phone line, leave a voice message, whatever is convenient for you. We're happy to answer questions, especially throughout the grant application period. So thanks for your time. We appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing applications from all of you here in the coming months. Thank you.